According to the South African Savings Institute, South Africans urgently need to change their mindset and attitude towards saving, as many consumers simply don't know how to save. Consumer debt is also crushing South Africans' hopes of building a savings culture, with 80% of disposable income going towards debt. With this in mind, what steps can be taken to empower and enable South Africans to improve their own personal savings habits, as well as the country's overall savings rate? Well, that's the topic of conversation on this special studio debate. Joining me on the desk today to share their insights is Lindwell Clark, Head of Consumer Education at the Financial Services Board of South Africa, Orlando Makubela, Chief Director for Financial Investments and Savings at National Treasury, and Richard Tregus, General Manager at Old Mutual Emerging Markets, there underneath the Savings Solutions Department of Old Mutual there. Well, we're also joined by a wonderful studio audience who will be putting their questions to the panel in the second half of that discussion. But before we delve a little bit deeper into this topic, let's take a look at the state of savings in South Africa as reflected in the Old Mutual Saving and Investment Monitor for 2014.
It makes the headlines every year. South Africans don't save. Even with the launch of initiatives such as Savings Month, held in July every year, it seems that South Africans still lack a definite savings culture. Never mind saving for a rainy day, aspects such as retirement, debt reduction and long-term investments are left wanting. And it's evident in the numbers. According to the key findings of Old Mutual's Savings and Investment Monitor for 2014, the state of saving in the country is definitely not where it needs to be, with a large portion of citizens struggling with putting away their extra rands. According to the monitor, 63% of South Africans believe that they will need to support family members in future. The number increases to 70% in black households. Only 9% of South Africans claim to be living comfortably, with a further 30% stating that they're doing all right. Only 1 in 4 have an RA, and in the baby boomers generation, approximately 1/3 have no formal retirement provision. Further to that, 1 in 3 South Africans still don't have any form of retirement savings. 39% believe that their children should look after them when they're old. This trend increased since 2009, with 46% of baby boomers believing this as well. Saving for funeral expenses, however, has increased from 30% in 2013 to 37% this year. But there's been a significant decline in saving for children's education, especially in the lower income groups. The savings differences between the different generations within the country's adult population is also evident. 57% of baby boomers support dependents, that's children, theirs or others. The number rises to 86% for Gen X and 50% for Gen Y. In terms of stokvel savings in black households, where there is a contribution to at least 1 stokvel per month, for baby boomers, it's 39%, Generation X slightly higher at 53%, and Gen Y at 38%. Numbers and findings aside, there does seem to be a glimmer of hope. According to the monitor, 80% of South Africans want guidance on learning to save. Surely, this is at least a step in the right direction.
Well, we certainly hope to continue in that path and moving in the right direction. And maybe to help us unpack this all, Richard, to start off with you, you are Mr. Old Mutual, certainly took part in gathering some of that data. We've seen a picture being painted about the savings culture in South Africa, but realistically, where have we gone wrong?
Well, it's actually quite difficult to answer. I think just to stress, it is actually a crisis now. I think if you ask the average South African to list the major challenges that South Africa faces, they probably wouldn't put the low level of savings high up on the list. But in fact, it is one of our really big problems. We have a very high level of indebtedness, and to compete effectively as a country, particularly against other emerging markets, we need a much higher rate of savings, because that's what drives economic growth. And the particularly puzzling thing I think about the survey was the fact that 80% of South Africans want to save, and yet it's not happening. So I think we have to really look at the reasons for that taking place.
So the market is there, we just need to address the issue quickly. Lindwell, maybe if I can come to you, you also deal with consumer education from the FSB's perspective. In your relationships and in your interactions with some of your counterparts in the industry, have you reached a level of depression just yet?
Not quite. I think we shouldn't look at savings in isolation. And I think when we speak savings, we should look at the holistic picture of a consumer or of a person or even of a household. So things like indebtedness, where do I get my money from? Those are important aspects to consider when we look at savings. And then again, if I have a little money left over at the end of the month, whether it's a 50, 100 or 1,000 rand, where do I put it? And what kind of instruments are out there for me to save? And is it affordable? Some people believe if I have a 50 rand over, I should go to KFC.
Yes.
Other people say if I have a 50 rand over, I can put it in a jar. So instead of going to a bank where I pay excess fees, instead of going to a financial planner where I still have to pay in any case, there are simpler ways of saving. And I think it's just for us to convey those messages of how to save and of very important when to save, but also why am I saving? To what end? What is the end product that I want to, or the end, what do I want to buy? Or am I saving for my financial future?
Exactly. Well, something else that I think a lot of South African consumers aren't aware of is that savings correlation towards economic growth, which you just alluded to. Orlando, maybe this is where you can come in, because people think I'm saving for myself, I'm saving for my own desires, but they don't understand the economic consequences that it actually has.
Yes, and that's a good point, Gugu. So if you look at advantages of savings, you could probably come up with a number of advantages. So one being, yes, for an individual, it helps for you to have money for that rainy day, because I can assure you all of us go through some rainy days in our lives. If you look at retirement, you know, if we are fortunate enough to live for long and reach retirement, the last thing you want is to get there and not have any retirement savings, because essentially it means poverty in old age. It means you having to rely excessively on government. Beyond the micro benefits and focusing on the macro benefits, yes. So the more savings you have in the system, the more you are able to fund investments. And any shortfalls means that you have to rely on foreign investors. That is not necessarily a bad thing if it's more long-term foreign funding, but the problem is if it's more short-term, volatile portfolio inflows which can reverse instantly, then that could cause major shocks and disruptions on your currency and on your system. So ultimately, if you follow the link, the higher your savings, the more investments you have, the better your growth rate.
Maybe if you can unpack that for us further, because we deal in an environment where we read the news headlines every day. Sluggish economic growth in South Africa, depressed consumer environment, hence my question about depression came up. And maybe those fundamentals, it isn't a good time now for South Africa to have such a low savings rate when there are all these other macroeconomic issues that are also working against us.
Yes, that's true, and it's quite a difficult question, but you know, I think you need a holistic approach, right? So you actually need everyone to pull their weight. As government, we can try and assist on the tax side, and that's what we're trying to do in terms of seeing how best we can tax incentivize savings. Of course, the private sector also needs to come into the picture. And I must say, actually, the private sector has been the one area which has saved more than everyone else. So at least compliment to the private sector. But indeed, because they, to a large extent, are the drivers of the economy. As government, we just need to ensure that the environment is conducive to do business. And hence, you want the private sector to also take up that opportunity. Then, of course, you've got household, and that's where it becomes a bit challenging, because some economists will say to you, well, actually the growth we have enjoyed in the past were driven very much by spending and consumption. So spending itself is not necessarily a bad thing. If you are spending money you have, it becomes a problem if indeed you rely excessively on debt to finance your spending. But I would argue that better to save, so use the saving investment growth link rather than excessive spending based on debt.
Exactly. Well, I want us just to get a wrap of the global comparison here, and maybe, Richard, this is where you can come in by telling us how we might compare to our BRICS counterparts when it comes to our saving rates. Yeah,
well, the rate of saving is actually shockingly low. It's 16.5% of GDP at the moment, and compared to other BRIC nations, India's at 30%, China's at 50%. And so when you have a level of savings that is that low, it means that you don't have funds available to invest back into the economy and to create infrastructure and help the economy grow. What we have instead is a large proportion of our population who are financially vulnerable. That obviously creates a lot of personal stress for people, but on top of that, there's a heavier burden on government. So even government themselves are constrained because they have a big social obligation to provide benefits for people who are financially vulnerable. Whereas that money, if the economy is strong and people had saved more, they could be applying that into infrastructure development that would actually help create new jobs. So we're actually in a little bit of a vicious circle, and our challenge is to actually try and turn that around into a virtuous circle, because if you can get people to stop borrowing, particularly as Alana says, borrowing to finance consumer kind of spending, and rather help people start saving, that money will go back into the economy, and South Africa will become a lot stronger, start to perform a whole lot better.
Exactly, and the lights would be kept on, we'd have the potholes being filled, but maybe now that we've identified the problem and we know where we stand from a global perspective, Lindwell, if we can come back to you to looking at the ways and the solutions in which we can find a way going forward to encourage savings in South Africa following the Old Mutual report. Let's touch on consumption. It's a topic that has come up by both Alana as well as Richard. South African consumers, are we still trying to keep up with the Joneses?
We are indeed. I think from our perspective, when we do financial education, we look at 4 areas, and that is financial planning, financial control, product choice, and of course knowledge and understanding. And the recent survey that we did have actually shown that we are good at financial control, we control well, but more and more the trends are showing that our financial planning, we're losing that battle because people don't have disposable income anymore. Product choice is very even over the past 3 years. But what is very worrying is that we've seen a trend of decline of financial knowledge and understanding, which shows that people don't really understand either the nature of the product or the product themselves. There's a huge amount of awareness around the types of instruments available, but really understanding what is it that I can buy with my 50 Rand, coming back to my previous example. But also then in terms of how do I take it forward? We also have a lack of knowledge in terms of my rights and responsibilities when I start engaging with financial services providers. And that sort of hampers the consumption that you're talking about. And where do I actually go? What's my next step? So now I have my 50 Rand. Who do I go to help me? And I think the lack of that kind of knowledge and that kind of skill, personal skill, when it comes to financial planning is lacking in the country. And when we do our consumer education programs, those are the kinds of areas we concentrate on. We're trying to provide people with the information. Where do I go to? Who do I speak to? We try to provide people with the right instruments. This is the type of instruments, not pushing any products, but this is the type of instruments that you can put your money into. And short of saying, we can't tell people you can't save under mattresses because people don't have access. Geographically, that is to a financial planner. People don't have access to a bank. So how do we overcome those kind of issues? And this is the kind of macro issues on a larger scale that we need to address. How do we get people more involved in our systems? Access, we talk about financial inclusion. Not just access to the bank or to the bank manager, but geographical access. Do people come out to the rural areas to look at those people starting their small businesses, growing maize? Where do I put my money? People have herds of cattle. In Zimbabwe, we believe there's a cattle bank. So these kind of solutions we need to look at more holistically and not just look at savings in isolation.
What's interesting that also came out of the report is that 80% of South Africans actually want access to this financial education. So we're doing the right thing by trying to get it out there, but access is the issue. And it does seem as though different LSM groups and different levels of affordability actually have better access or easier access to CFPs, certified financial planners. There are people out there who are qualified to do the job, but what's holding South African consumers back from actually approaching these individuals, Richard, and seeking financial advice?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge of savings is access and distribution. And I think if you look around the world, the most effective forms of savings have been where there's been a mandatory element, or at least some form of automatic scheme. Because there are a lot of reasons that prevent people from saving. Sometimes it's a confusion, being overwhelmed by choice. But there's just generally a lot of inertia. People don't take action. And I think even if you look at the definition of savings, it's a deferral of consumption. And that's often very difficult to do because the present tends to weigh much more heavily on us. It's a greater priority, and we tend to discount the future at quite a heavy rate. And so people just don't take action. They would put it off to another day. And I think that's why automatic systems that don't require people to take action, but rather rely on their passivity, are actually most effective. And so, the sort of proposals that National Treasury have been putting forward to improve a level of compulsory contribution and including limited access to those savings, that they stay there, I think is exactly the sort of answer to really help South Africa's savings levels lift up.
You're raising such an important point, and I can tell you tiptoeing around it. Let's go to you, Alana, to unpack this for us all, especially when it comes to retirement. The regulations that you have in place or trying to implement with regard to the excessive amount of withdrawals that we're seeing from retirement savings. So
Richard is spot on. And I think it's useful just to give some context on the economic side. So the world has sort of shifted away from assuming that the average individual is perfect. So has got all the information they need, they are able to process it, they can understand it and make the right decisions. In reality, we are not like that. So there is an element of behavior which is quite complex, which you cannot ignore in the equation. And the question has been, how do you then start nudging individuals in doing the right thing, which is exactly what Richard is talking about. So one way of dealing with behavioral challenges is to actually have defaults and the right defaults. So for example, when it comes to retirement, the way it would work is that you would default any worker who joins an employer into a retirement fund. However, if they feel that's a bit onerous on them, they can always have the right to opt out. Research shows that by far people stick in. So the inertia which Richard mentioned, because it's much more difficult exercising that decision to opt out than if you were to ask someone to make that hard decision of joining in or not, because then you start thinking about your finances, will this be enough, etc. So defaults are quite effective in getting people to do the right things. And that's exactly what we've been trying to come up with in terms of retirement reforms. You sort of have a bit of that when it comes to retirement savings, because currently if your employer offers a pension or a provident fund, you are required to be a member. What is missing there is that there isn't an obligation on the employer to offer a retirement fund. So this is where you get to the issue of whether should we mandate that every individual must therefore be a member of a retirement fund and therefore require all employers to provide one. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, because again, you take advantage of the default system and the hope that people will remain in that system. Then you have quite a complex area around discretionary savings. So the challenge we have realized in South Africa is that South Africans use their retirement savings as an all-encompassing only saving vehicle. So you run into that rainy day, you need to get some extra funding for your kids' fees. You have no other saving pool except your retirement. So what people tend to do is to resign for the sole reason of cashing their retirement savings so that they can pay that debt or meet those unexpected expenditures.
But we can't say it's a surprise when we have so many people that are sitting in the sandwich generation.
Indeed.
Exactly.
Yes.
I want us to come back to this and maybe allude to an earlier point that you made mention of, where employers have to take on the responsibility of encouraging their employees to have some kind of retirement savings. And this comes on to responsible business, Richard, which is a strong point for Old Mutual.
Yeah, it is. So, obviously organizations like Old Mutual in the financial services industry are doing a huge amount to increase the level of savings. But I think if we just talk about other employers, Alana makes a point that if employers offer retirement or schemes, that members need to join. But the fact is that of the 12 million employed, only 6 million have access to retirement funds. So for the other 6 million employed people, there's no provision via the employer. So, I think for employers, there's been a trend towards just offering cash packages, but actually, employers should be making retirement and other saving solutions available to their staff. If not on a compulsory basis, at least on a basis where they have to opt out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because a financially healthy employee will be a better employee.
Exactly. Maybe to come to you, Lindwell, just to get your insights on this one. 1 in 4 people in South Africa has a retirement annuity. 1 in 3 doesn't have any savings option for their retirement. Are you keeping tabs maybe on the financial services sector as to how they are encouraging when it comes to product offerings, this kind of retirement annuity savings or any other forms of retirement savings?
Yeah. Not keeping tabs per se, but we encounter daily consumers that have retirement plans, but the issue is that they don't know what their benefits look like. So it's this kind of lack of knowledge of what it is that I'm going to get out when I do retire. And I think the pension funds themselves can do more to educate their members around providing them with that kind of statistics. Also, if you're starting out, a lot of our young employees don't know anything about pension funds. So there we need a lot of education around what it is that my pension fund is, how much is being deducted every month, what is my company giving versus what I'm paying. And I think it's important that that kind of education starts at school level already. But I think what is important now is that people need to realize what it is that I'm going to get out when I do retire. And what do I have to do now to complement, to supplement that? Okay, and where do I go to? Is my fund providing for me, providing that kind of education? Because when you get to 55 and you realize that I'm going to retire soon and I don't have enough, statistics shows us that about 13% of South Africans believe that they have to work after they retire again. And that's a huge chunk of South Africans. And where are they going to find work? You are a bit old, and we're looking for younger people to come into the system. So those are the social aspects that we also need to look at. I want to come back to the education part of it. I think there's a lack of education around these kind of future financial securing our financial future. The American Protection Bureau uses the term financial well-being. And I don't think we're looking at what is the well-being of our citizens from an early age. So we need to look at what it is that I can afford, can I meet my day-to-day costs and ongoing costs? Then is my financial future secured? And then do I have the ability to make decisions about my life so that I can enjoy my life? So, and I think at the end of the day, we need to provide that to our consumers. We're sitting with a huge indebtedness, a population that's hugely indebted, and people just don't see their way clear. So you come to them and say, you must save, you must save. And they say, what do I save? I don't have money. I live from hand to mouth. Even though I have my retirement fund, even though I get an income, I just can't save. So what we're trying to promote is you need to produce more than you consume. And you need to consume less than what you produce.
That's a tough one for South Africans to understand, though.
We also look at immediate gratification. I want to buy that Levi jeans now.
Exactly.
I don't want to put the money away so that I can, in 6 months, buy it as cash.
Exactly.
So we got to show them those options. This is what you're going to pay when you pay now, or when you pay in 6 months. And if you buy it on credit now, this is what you're going to cost you over the long run.
The power of compound interest
Exactly.
is a secret that you have in your back pocket.
Very important.
But I just want to continue with and wrap up our focus on retirement here, especially from a government perspective. Are the incentives working, first of all? And when it does come to retirement reforms, do we need to tighten up the belts there? Or stricter controls, the answer, in other words?
Sure. I think incentives are quite useful. And I must be honest, I think the tax incentives on retirement contributions are quite generous. And actually, we have raised the contribution caps recently. Of course, that's part of the legislation which has been postponed. But that was meant largely to encourage South Africans to even contribute more into their retirement savings. We have even gone further to see how best we can encourage South Africans to save beyond just their retirement. So we have announced this tax-free individual saving account, which essentially meant to help South Africans to save as a form of supplementing their retirement savings so that they don't rely or have to rely exclusively on their retirement savings. So we are hoping there will be good take up for that product, and it actually has been quite successful in the UK. So we are hoping that the industry will also come on board in terms of ensuring that the products are affordable, they are transparent, and appropriate. So we do think incentives can work, yes, but I think you probably also need something beyond just incentives. So just to comment on Lindel's useful point, there's a theory currently that, you know, if you also give people too much information, so for example, your benefit statement and you are indebted, then you are likely to say, wow, I've got money, so actually I can resign, get the money and pay off my debts. So the only way you can counterbalance that is to have some form of compulsory preservation. And we are not talking about full preservation, because we realize there are socio-economic challenges in South Africa, but you do need some kind of compulsion just to get the balance right. Exactly, stricter controls. Richard, very quickly, I just want to find out from you if certain generational groups are more at risk, because 48% of baby boomers believe that their children should be looking after them.
Yeah, well, interestingly, the actually...
You laugh, Olana, but it's the truth. The sandwich generation.
The sandwich generation, I think, face a particularly tough challenge. Yeah, I think what's sad to see is even the baby boomers who are closest to retirement, still only a third actually have made any provision. And even of those that have provided, the statistic is only 6% actually have enough. So this problem goes across kind of all age bands, all income levels. It really is, it's very widespread. And I think, as Alana was saying earlier, you know, just to put in place schemes where people just automatically have to save and actually aren't able to access, or only access to a very limited degree, those retirement funds, I think that really is the only long-term solution for South Africa and indeed any country. So clearly the right products as well as a financial wellness, as you alluded to earlier, Lindwell. While we're going to a short commercial break, do stay with us, because we will be back with more tips and insights on improving South Africa's saving culture. We'll be back shortly. A warm welcome back to the special discussion on improving South Africa's savings culture. Still with me in studio is Lyndall Clark. He's the Head of Consumer Education at the Financial Services Board of South Africa. Olano Makubela, Chief Director for Financial Investments and Savings at National Treasury. And Richard Tregus, General Manager for Savings Solutions at Old Mutual Emerging Markets. Gentlemen, just before the ad break, we did touch on products, the correct product that needs to go out there to the consumer to allow them to save, whether it's for their retirement, funeral policies, or any of the other, as well as ensuring that they understand the wellness element to it. From Old Mutual's perspective, the product offerings that you have out there available for consumers, are you seeing a difference in their habits and understanding whether enough is enough? We are indeed. I think there's continual evolvement of products and turning them more into solutions that actually work for people. And I think the one thing we've realized as an organization is a lot of our products have been directed towards long-term savings for retirement and other long-term needs. But I think if you look at where South African consumers are at the moment, their short-term financial situation is actually in a bit of a crisis. And we realize that we can't develop effective long-term solutions if we actually don't help them solve their short-term solutions as well.
How important is that, the balance between long-term and short-term savings?
Well, I think it's really a sequence. So I think firstly helping people get on top of their debt that's kind of where you need to start, and make sure that people understand the difference between good debt that finances assets or businesses and bad debt which finances consumption. So helping people have a plan around getting their debt down, consolidating it, and actually actively trying to get out of those bad forms of debt, I think is a starting place. Then helping people to understand their budgets. So you've got to know where your money is going, and you have to have a plan. And you have to make sure that saving is built into your plan, because otherwise it just doesn't happen. I think beyond that then, to set people up with short-term saving solutions so that they can just make themselves less financially vulnerable to situations in their life, you know, suddenly car breaks or any one of a number of situations, which if you don't actually build up a short-term safety net, you know, any long-term savings that you have, as Lana was saying earlier, that's when people need to start raiding their retirement funds.
Exactly.
Because they don't have other forms. So I think trying to design solutions that actually meet those full range of needs is the answer, and to be able to move people progressively from being in debt and financially vulnerable into greater levels of financial security. That's our aim. And along with that, you know, trying to improve the level of disclosure, making sure our products are simple, educating people, making sure they really understand how these products work. And the most powerful thing is to try and connect it to a life goal. Because if people are just saving randomly or saving because they think, you know, they're good tax reasons, it doesn't actually resonate emotionally with them. You need to attach it to, I'm saving for my child's education or for my retirement or for some other dream that I have. And I think, you know, saving then becomes a lot easier to do and a lot more effective.
Exactly. And Lyndall, maybe this brings us to you, where you obviously deal with consumer education from a formal level as well as in communities. Do people understand? You know, we throw these words out there: interest rates, inflation, compound interest, long-term versus short-term, but do they actually get the nitty-gritties of these products that they're being offered?
Yeah, our research has shown that we've got a very low level of this knowledge and understanding. And the worrying trend, and I think I've mentioned earlier, is that in the cohort 16 to 19-year-olds, there's been a downward trend in that kind of knowledge and understanding. And maybe we should look at our school education system in terms of what kind of education and what kind of information is being provided. Remembering that we don't have a lot of students going on to tertiary educations. Most of our students go straight into the world of work. And this is where they encounter financial services providers, because the moment you earn a salary, you get the phone call. So we need to get that kind of information to them as soon as possible. The other thing I want to point out, again, there's a huge amount of awareness around simple banking products. People know about banking products. But when it comes to savings and investments, there's a lower level of awareness, but also a lower level of uptake. And I think because of the amount of money required, and people think that because I don't have money, I cannot have an investment. And I think we need to get that message out there that there are products available, or we need to speak to those that are in the business to start creating that kind of products. Because another issue is now, who carries the risk of a low-level product? Is it the consumer, or is it the services provider? So those are the kinds of issues that both sides need to look at. We need to inform our consumers, but on the other hand, we need to look at the services provider to see, are you being responsible in starting to punting your products? Are you using the treating customers, consumers fairly, exactly. Your policies? Have you got these in place? So from a regulatory point of view, it's also our responsibility to see that this happens. But I think overall, there is a general lack of knowledge and understanding of what is a savings product. Do I save for, is savings for short term and investment for long term? Do I save for that Levi jeans today, or for my financial future, like Richard has said? Is it secure because my child needs to go to school? Do I start saving when my child is born, or do I wait till he's actually going to school? And also, what product am I taking up? Because I've had a personal experience where I was sold a product and told that this is for your child's education. And when he went to university, the guy told me, I'm sorry, but this thing only pays out when he's 35.
No way.
So also about reading your contract. So there's the rights and responsibilities for the consumer. What is it that you're actually buying? So if you buy a financial product for your child's education, are you actually buying that for his education, or did you read the fine print? So there's the responsibility for the consumer coming in, very important.
And that sits on both sides, as you've clearly alluded to.
Of course, yes.
Exactly. Would there ever be potential, Alana, for public-private partnerships? You know, we hear about saving for education. We know that there's an awareness for saving for retirement, and Old Mutual has those products for both areas that I've mentioned now. Yeah. But what about working hand in hand, where individuals are held accountable to actually save for these two things?
It's a good question, and I think a good example is how we have worked with industry on the tax-free saving account, because we have literally held numerous sessions with the industry to try and see if we can provide a wide range of products. So going to Lynn's point, that you actually want to move away from thinking that when you talk about saving, you're talking about a bank account. And I think most people, when you say saving, they think bank account. But there is no way you are going to save long term using a bank. It's fine for that rainy day, But if it's more of growth you are looking for in the long term, you are better off in some kind of equity-orientated product. And that's why we have engaged with the industry to say provide tax-free individual savings accounts, which will include, yes, your bank account, your collective investment scheme, so unit trusts, your exchange-traded funds, of course, the government retail bond also is on offer. So to provide a wide range so that people can have a choice in terms of which product is more suitable for them. So we have indeed engaged quite closely with the industry. And because we can't be product providers as government, and we don't want to be that, so we rather leave that to the people who are good at doing, but then you do need some regulations just to ensure that, you know, at the end of the road, when you need your saving, you get it. The last thing you want to be told 20 years down the line is that your saving has disappeared into a sinkhole. So you are going to need some financial regulation.
Exactly. Linville, you wanted to share something?
I just wanted to add another point in terms of products. It also goes around trust.
Yes.
Who do people trust with their money? And we found that a lot of people, they have banking accounts because they're forced to. But what they do is, the moment their salaries get put into the account, they withdraw all the cash. So there's no transaction going on. And this whole perception about I can't trust anybody else with my money because you want me to pay to get my money back. And I think trust issues, and I think from the industry side also, that kind of relationship that you have with your client is very important. The more trustworthy the client sees you are, the more clients you will have at the end. And I believe that the more informed your consumers are about your products and about what you stand for, and that you're looking after their needs. I think this is an important part, that you're looking at the needs of the consumer before you're looking at your own needs. And I don't want to go further into that, but I think that's a very important point.
Richard agrees with you.
Because that goes around trust. That goes around the trust issues.
Exactly.
Absolutely, I agree. You know, I think when it comes to financial services, trust is essential. And there are probably, you know, 3 areas where I think the industry is really trying to improve the level of trust that consumers have. I think the one is just on the products offered, making sure that customers don't get caught out with surprise elements, or they're insufficiently flexible, or you know, they're not sufficiently transparent, or they're difficult to understand. So there's a huge push towards trying to simplify them, and actually trying to eliminate some of the difficult choices that customers are faced with. I think secondly, in the area of advice, people really need to trust advisors. And you know, there's a funny pattern at work. If you ask people the degree to which they trust financial advisors, there isn't always a very high rate. And yet people often trust their personal advisor. So I actually think the perception around advisors not being always trustworthy is more of a perception than a reality, because there are most advisors are fantastic people that have a real passion about helping people to take control of their finances. And I think the retail distribution review, there was a paper that came out last week. I think all of those initiatives are really geared towards an increasing professionalization of the industry and making sure that customers are paying for advice as opposed for a sale where people are you know, paid for selling. And that's when you have distortions and kind of wrong sort of behaviors come in.
Exactly.
And so just the third area then I think is in the area of cost, because there's massive pressure, particularly in retirement funds, you know, where costs can have a big impact to try and bring down costs. And actually, if you look at charges on products compared to 10 years ago, they've come down dramatically. But you know, we can do more. And I think the greater the level of savings and the higher the volume of assets, more costs will come down.
Exactly.
So I think all of those factors, as we keep addressing them, and we have a very competitive market actually. So competitive forces are alive and well, and you know, they part of the reason that costs have come down.
Which works well for the consumer.
Indeed, it does. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, on that note, we do have our studio audience, which has been sitting very patiently, taking down notes as well as changing their positions in their seats. I'm sure there are a few of you with questions that you'd like to pose to the panel. If you do, please stand up, state your name and the organization that you represent, and address your question to the panel. We'll take questions in a series of 3, please. But the floor is open. Don't be nervous.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bongo Simam. I'm from the TTI. I'm from government. But it's not a question per se, but it's just a comment. Like Keynes will say, there's nothing like the long run, so we'll all be dead. There's Ebola now, so why save? It's just a joke. But anyway, you talked about the information around financial knowledge and understanding, and also touched on tax-free incentive accounts. So, and the fact that there's about 80% of South Africans that are willing to save, but they're not saving. So it seems like there's so much information out there that people are aware of, but it's just the action that they're not doing part that is happening. So my comment or concern is that what exactly is it that we're not doing correct in terms of disseminating the right information so that people can actually action on that information? I'll give you a good example. I work for government. I interact with a lot of government officials. Like this morning, one of my colleague was actually filing for SARS. And then he saw that there was less money that he used to get in the past, and then was asking me, what's happening? And then I asked him, what did you used to do before that you're not doing now? And he talked about cancelling his retirement annuity. And I said, that's the problem, because you get some money back if you have RAs. So there seemed to be lack of information, particularly within government information, officials. And if you take into account that government is the largest employer, imagine how many people will save if they will have the right information. That will definitely shoot the saving rate up. Thank you.
Exactly. Sibongi Nkosi, thank you so much for your question. We'd like to take another question from the floor. To the gentleman in the front, please. Your name, sir?
Thaba Makwele is my name. I'm also from government, in Mpumalanga Provincial Government, Department of Economic Development. We are all aware that recently we have experienced high rate of resignation from or by public servants, especially educators. I'm just trying to check with the National Treasury as to whether there is anything that is happening in terms of interventions, coordinating and integrating, the approach to deal with the matter, because it's going to have a serious impact on our education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll take one more question from the floor. To the gentleman behind you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Golele from the National Credit Regulator. My question is directed to Mr. Makwele. It's actually almost similar to what the gentleman next to me asked. I want to find out to what extent National Treasury has gone out to make sure that consumers are aware of these tax-free incentives or tax-free accounts that they may use to encourage a level of saving. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the three gentlemen there for your questions. Let's pick up with the first one. Our cricket fans, Sibongi Nkosi, giving us a question there with regard to the dissemination of information there. And Lindwall, you can pick up on that one if you will, please.
Yeah, let me start with that one. I think because that's the only one I can answer. I think in terms of dissemination, it's important that we have a coordinated effort. To that effect, Treasury has, with the aid of the Financial Services Board and various stakeholders in the industry, developed a national strategy for consumer education, where we're focusing on the 4 areas I've mentioned: financial control, financial planning, knowledge and understanding, and product choice. And then what we've done is we've formed a National Consumer Financial Education Committee to coordinate efforts. The reason why people are not getting enough is because sometimes we duplicate our efforts. The National Credit Regulator or the National Consumer Commission might be working in an area and we work in the same area and we're talking about the same things. So what we need to do in terms of dissemination, we need to have a broad strategy in terms of who's going to do what and where we're going to do it, and then coordinate those efforts. And in that way, if we all speak from the same hymn book and if we all speak the same language, people get the same message. And I think that's very important, that people understand and everybody speaks the same language. Because if we have different messages going out to consumers from different government departments or different regulators, we'll have mass confusion out there. So that is why we are trying to coordinate efforts in terms of what is the information that needs to go out there, but also who is bringing the message. It's very important that those that bring the message are being trusted for what they are saying, and that it's the right message that's being broadcasted.
Just on that, Lindwall, something that Sibongi Nkosi mentioned is that government is the largest employer in the country. Are the avenues that we're using the wrong ones, potentially? We speaking on a television platform right now, don't we need to go out there to the community halls, as well as publish this out in the newspapers and really speak to the people directly, which Old Mutual also has some initiatives like that?
Indeed, Old Mutual has a number of different programs. You know, we've actually spent hundreds of millions in financial education and run a lot of workshops. We've got 3 different programs. One's the On the Money program, which I think is great, and that really gets the basics of financial behavior. And it relates some key behaviors with the big 5 animals, and there's, as an example, the rhino, charge down debt. You're familiar with that. And that's a very effective program, just getting the basics for people to understand what good financial behaviors are. But we've also obviously got more sophisticated programs, something called Fin 360, and we offer a financial well-being program to employers and trustees. We can go into employee groups and we teach them, particularly around retirement planning and the importance of preservation. So there's a tremendous need, and I think you're right. It is in the community halls and in workshops and places where you can really engage with people and get them to understand their financial issues and engage. But there's still a need for advice beyond that. You know, education goes so far, but generally people also want someone to help them make those tough decisions around which products and how does tax work. We're not going to teach the whole country. We're not going to make them financial experts. Exactly. So there's a role for advice.
Exactly. Lindwall, quickly?
Yes, let me add on to that. Besides the National Consumer Committee, we've also got a Consumer Protection Forum, which includes regulators, it includes government, and it includes all the consumer affairs offices in the various provinces. So what we have is joint ventures where we go out in a specific province and we disseminate those messages in town halls, in communities. I think the big challenge is communication. How do we tell communities there'll be a meeting or there'll be a workshop? And we use community radios to a large extent. But I think coordinating all those efforts for me is very important, so that communities know at a certain time, at a certain date, there'll be a session on financial education or on financial issues where they can actually get some assistance.
Exactly. Well, that does bring us on to our second question from Mr. Makwekle there, representing the Mpumalanga province. I take it this one is a hot one for you, Olano, especially with regard to the interventions regarding not deposits, but the money being pulled out of retirement savings.
Yes. So the question relates to government employees. And it's actually very interesting because our sense, and based on anecdotal evidence, is that it is actually your government employees who are highly indebted vis-a-vis private sector employees. Now that probably explains a lot of things because the reforms which are currently contained in the Tax Amendment Act do not actually affect government employees. And the reason is simple. It's because if you're a government employee, you'll be contributing into the GEPF. The GEPF is a pension fund. So it is not required to annuitize, because the concern has been that because of your requirement to annuitize, which is a problem with provident funds, people then somehow confuse that to think they will no longer be able to access their retirement savings. 2, that government was trying to nationalize their retirement savings. 3, that actually we have run out of money as government and we are trying to raise money, for example, to fund e-tolls. And literally those are the feedbacks we got from the public. So there you have an indebtedness issue, and that you can understand why then you get that resignation problem, because it's actually not about the reforms. It's because people still think the only way they are going to get out of their debt trap is to access their retirement savings, which you can only do by resigning. And the reality is that because they are teachers and because we have a shortage of teachers in the system, literally the following month they get re-employed. So then you do have another problem there in terms of, as government, as DPSA, how can you try and put measures to discourage that trend? So we are trying to communicate the correct message. And as I said earlier on in another session, we can only go so far in terms of information, because if indeed your problem is indebtedness, it's not going to help much how much accurate information I give you in terms of whether the reforms affect you or not, because you will still want to access your money so that you can extinguish your debt.
Exactly.
So I think for government, you do probably need a kind of special approach and project to deal with government employees. And it links to the other question on tax-free savings account.
Yes.
Probably, and this might sound controversial, you know, one way of dealing with the saving problem and within government is to actually default people into that account, but then allow them to opt out if they feel for a particular month they just happen to be stretched. And you might realize that most of them actually end up, because of inertia, remaining in the account and not opting out. It is a bit of a controversial issue, because then it means as government you must take a bit of a paternalistic approach and say, I am going to now compel you to do this, even though it's soft compulsion, because you can still opt out. And probably the best way of getting it through is to see if you can't get the unions and the employer to come together and agree and say, this is in the best interest of our workers. And because if they come together, they're able to have better bargaining power with the industry, and therefore they can be able to get better value in terms of products, and agree with their members to literally default them into this tax-free saving account.
Exactly. Well, Lana, we might have to leave it there just for now when it comes to the responses to the questions, because we are running out of time. Maybe this brings us to the closing comments from all three of you with regard to the objectives that we need to set ahead of ourselves for the next 5 years as to how we tackle, and if I can steal the phrase, charge down our debt and actually address the savings crisis that we have in South Africa. Richard, within 30 seconds, the key things, objectives that we need to stick to.
Yeah, I think the main objective is to get a more effective retirement system in place. On top of that, to help move people from debt into savings, so not just for retirement, but for other needs, and make them a lot more financially secure.
Fantastic. Olano, your point of view?
So I would say discipline. There's
the parent in you.
In terms of saving and spending. And I think to assure the public that they shouldn't think the reforms are now put on hold. They have been postponed. There are other areas which we are still working on, and we will hope that we will continue rolling out those reforms, because essentially they're about ensuring that the worker has got a better deal at the end of the day.
Exactly. Lindwall, your closing points?
Spend less than what you earn.
Don't buy those jeans.
Don't buy those jeans. And at the end of the day, if you do decide to spend or buy a financial product, make sure that you buy it from an authorized services provider, authorized through the Financial Services Board.
Exactly. Well, on that note, thank you so much for your insights today, gentlemen. Hopefully South Africans are a lot more wiser, but it does bring us to the end of the special savings focus studio discussion. Thank you so much to my guests, Lindwall Clark, Head of Consumer Education at the Financial Services Board of South Africa, Olano Makubela, Chief Director for Financial Investments and Savings at National Treasury, and Richard Tregus, General Manager for Saving Solutions at Old Mutual Emerging Markets. A big thank you as well to our studio audience who have been so kind in asking some questions and participating. But until next time, from myself, Kukule Tutsele, and the team, it's goodbye and keep saving.